Okay, everybody, if you'll make your way back to your computer, we have a lot more to get through. So I want to get started. It's 10:30. Sorry for the fast break, but there's a lot to cover. So hopefully everybody was able to grab some coffee and we're ready for another hour and a half of fun. So we're going to talk about now, Fannie Mae adopts some ANSI measurement standards, which is actually really exciting because we haven't had any real measuring standards until now. And Freddie will be, I'm sure, following suit. And then next thing you know, it'll be ANSI everywhere. And I get a lot of questions about square foot measurements because as everybody knows, square footage is probably one of the biggest points of contention for everybody, and one of those things that seems rather elusive that we can't seem to figure out, how they're measured. You have, three appraisers come in and they all get different measurements. You look at the county records, it's something else. Various sources will give you various numbers, and it's kind of strange because the house doesn't grow and shrink. It's just what it is. So why are we getting all these different numbers? And the reason is because we have no common standards. Nobody is, people aren't using the same measurements as each other because we don't have these standards. And as a result, we're getting everything. So ANSI standards are probably used most commonly, but there's also the American measurement standards. And then some people just go rogue, right? They do whatever they want to do. They measure any way they want to measure. So it's actually really exciting that we may have some consistencies. When a property sells and resells and you have multiple appraisals on the property, we should not be getting different numbers every time. And then hopefully we're moving in that direction. Fannie Mae historically has not required the use of any specific measurement standards, but they will be required. They are going to start requiring that everything be ANSI to ANSI standards, which is the American National Standards Institute. And the policy update will standardize the method used to measure, calculate the way we measure gross living area and non-gross living area of a property. So all footprint sketches and floor plans must be computer generated, not hand drawn. That's part of the ANSI requirements. Indicate all the dimensions needed to calculate the gross living area and other required areas such as garage and basement, and show the calculations to demonstrate how the estimate for gross living area was derived. So why the change? Well, valuations of residential property correlate strongly, obviously, with the gross living area, or the GLA. Yet to date, there is little consistency in how appraisers determine it. Fannie Mae's adoption of the ANSI standard for measures, calculating, and reporting square footage creates alignment across the market participants, provides a professional and defensible method for the appraiser, and allows transparent, repeatable results for the user of the appraisal report. So all good things, all good things. I'm surprised it took them this long. So how well do you know ANSI? So let's talk about some of the ANSI measurement requirements. So they use the exterior dimension for all finished spaces. They measure from the outside of the house above the foundation. Measurements are taken to the nearest inch or tenth of a foot, and the final square footage is reported to the nearest whole square foot. Staircases are included in the GLA, gross living area, of the floor from which they descend. Okay, the floor from which they descend. A basement is any space that is partially or completely below grade. And the GLA calculation does not include openings to the floor below. So if you have a 2-story foyer, for example. Finished rooms, walls and ceiling finishes included, but are not limited to painted, gypsum wallboard, wallpaper, covered plasterboard, and wood paneling. Floor finishes include, but are not limited to carpeting, vinyl sheeting, hardwood flooring, and concrete floors with decorative finishes, but do not include bare or painted concrete floor. In determining what a finished room is, if it just has a bare or painted concrete, that is not considered a finished room. Decorative finishes are long-lasting or permanent components of the slab produced by such method as chemical staining, integral coloration of the concrete, scoring or stamping that modify the texture or appearance of the slab. Because we see a lot of really cool things they're doing with concrete right now. So they have said that, if there is a decorative finish on the concrete, that is considered a finished room. But if you just have that bare or painted concrete, it's not going to be considered a finished room. So let's think about your client's basement. Do they have bare or painted concrete walls? Maybe bare concrete floors? Then that portion of the basement cannot count towards a basement finish. More on that later. Okay, so the basement seems to always be an issue. Perhaps they have concrete floors in the main portion of the home. Yes, we've seen it many times. If the concrete is not treated with the aforementioned types of finishes, and they're just bare, then again, they're not going to be considered. This is an example, as I said, of some really cool things they can do with concrete, as we all know these days, and those would be considered finished floors and finished areas. Finished area must have a ceiling height of at least 7 feet. In a room with a sloping ceiling, at least 50% of the finished square footage of the room must have a ceiling height of at least 7 feet, and no portion of the finished area that has a ceiling height of less than 5 feet will be included in the gross living areas, the GLA. If a house has finished area that does not have a ceiling height of at least 7 feet, 50% of the finished area, the appraiser may put this area on a separate line item in the sales comparison grid with the appropriate market adjustment. So it's not like they don't have to completely ignore it, but there would be a special place for them to note that fact. The report will be an ANSI compliant and also acknowledge the contributing value of the non-GLA square foot. So that, that part of the house that would not qualify under GLA because of, for example, the ceiling heights. What if comparable sales are measured differently? The GLA for properties in the MLS system and the assessor's records may not be ANSI compliant. So the appraiser may not know what method an MLS listing or assessor used to calculate the GLA. Through the research and through their own knowledge of the local market, appraisers determine that the GLA provided through the alternate sources should be adjusted. And the adjustment process does not change the requirement to report subject to GLA to the ANSI standard. So yeah, I mean, because we've had no standardization, the numbers that these appraisers are working off of in finding, comparable properties, they're not standard. They may be different from each other. They may be different than the ANSI standard that the appraiser is using now. And so there's going to be a lot of work for the appraiser, right? Because they don't know exactly what method was used to measure those other properties. And they're going to have to, do some work to make a determination as to whether or not those are really comparable properties. And again, down the road, if we can all get on the ANSI standard, then this won't be an issue, but that's going to take us a while, isn't there? So is there an exception to the process? If the appraiser is unable to adhere to the ANSI standard, the appraiser is going to provide this code in the additional features field on the appraisal form and explain why compliance was not possible. So for example, a berm house. Homes with their entire square footage below grade would be eligible for an exception. The appraiser must provide justification for the exception, and lenders are responsible for confirming the appraiser provided an adequate explanation. That's going to be on the lender. Fannie Mae will monitor for inappropriate use of exceptions using a method other than the ANSI standard for homes that have typical above grade square footage. So there is a carve out exception for things that can't be done traditionally. So let's talk about garages and other areas. Garages and unfinished areas cannot be included in the calculation of finished square footage. Chimneys, windows, and other finished areas that protrude beyond the exterior finished surface of the outside walls and do not have a floor on the same level cannot be included in the calculation. Porches, balconies, decks, similar areas that are not enclosed or not suitable for year-round occupancy cannot be included in the square footage calculation. Have access. Have you ever gone into a home that had a bonus room above the garage? And how did you access that room? Did you go through the living room and up over the garage, or did you have to walk into an unfinished garage and then upstairs into the bonus room? Finished areas above garages are included in the finished square footage that is the same level as the main body of the house, but only if they're connected to the house by continuous finished areas such as hallways or staircases. So did you go through the living room and up over the garage? Then it's going to be calculated. Did you have to walk into an unfinished garage and then go up the stairs? Then it's not going to be included. One of the most common questions we get when appraising a home, or appraisers get when about home appraisal, is a basement. Do you count the basement in the square footage? And ANSI guidelines state that if any portion of the lower level is below the grade, then that entire level is considered a basement. So if you're at grade level on 3 sides, but one side is 2 feet under, then the entire lower level is considered a basement. And whether or not that basement counts towards GLA goes back to things like finished walls and finished floors and that type of thing. So for additional information, you can take a look at this selling guide. You can actually buy a copy of this. You can go to Home Innovation Research Labs and get a copy of this, or you can also get it on Amazon, I saw. So appraisers are encouraged to begin using the ANSI as soon as possible. However, it will be required for appraisals with an effective date of April 1st, 2022. So right around the corner, we're going to be seeing this as a requirement for the secondary markets. And of course, that's going to spill over and be a requirement for everybody, right? So we see that coming up. So you might want to familiarize yourself with other aspects of the ANSI measurements. Like I said, I get questions all the time about measuring square footage and how that works. And this guide will take you there. And it will be, again, we're going to have some standards now, which is just terrific. If you're interested you can go to this website, and there are some classes that you can take on home measurement specialists. For appraisers, there's a 2 7-hour course required with a final exam. And for real estate brokers, there's a 1 4-hour course or 2 5-hour classes and a final exam. I never, ever, ever will encourage you to do any kind of square footage measurement. I mean, imagine that after you took this class, you'd be pretty good at it. And maybe you'd feel empowered to do it, but you certainly shouldn't be doing it without having, something along these lines, some training in it. But even with training, I always suggest that you guys leave it to the experts, unless you consider yourself an expert, I suppose. And if you get this classification, this home measurement specialist classification, you'll feel confident enough to do it. But otherwise, I would not be trying to measure properties, you guys. It just creates a tremendous amount of liability for you. We updated some forums. They've been out since last October, but this is the YouTube channel. If you didn't get to see what those look like, I encourage you guys to go there. That's the end of my presentation today. You have questions, call me on the hotline. Don't call me about the appraisal contingency stuff quite yet, because that's still being massaged a little bit. And when that form gets released, I'm going to do an update, a video that you guys can watch. And so if you still have questions after that, feel free to get in touch with me. I just wanted to introduce all of that to you and let you know it's in the works, and that we are working through that right now. Hopefully something will be out in the next week to 2 weeks on that. And that's all I have for you today. Thank you guys so much for hanging in there with me. I know I'm about 10 minutes over. That's not too bad at all. I hope you guys have a wonderful rest of the day and a wonderful weekend.